infinite complacence, people went to and fro over the earth about their little affairs, serene in the assurance of their dominion over this small, spinning fragment of solar driftwood, which by chance or design man has inherited out of the dark mystery of time and space.
On this edition of Into the Fray, I welcome on with me Suzanne. She got in touch with me via email and has plenty of interesting things to share. Suzanne, welcome on the show. Thank you so much for getting in touch with me.
Thank you so much for having me, Shannon. I'm really looking forward to this.
Yeah, and you've got quite the, it runs the gamut, right? These kinds of experiences that we're going to be talking about today.
You might say.
Yeah, I would definitely say, and I like shows like this because you've got all kinds of different things going on. Now, I know that the list that you sent it starts in Pasadena, California at 4 years old. But, is there anything before we start right there and jump in that maybe, folks should know about your family history, anything like that? I mean, I don't want to make you just jump right into the first thing if there's maybe some backstory that we need to know.
Yeah, sure. I think that's really important because although the first item on the bullet points is that very visitation at 4 years old, I didn't remember about that visitation until I was much older. And what had happened was it was 1987 and my daughter was 1 year old and I had gone to the bookstore. When I walked in the bookstore, you know how they have like the shelf with all the new releases like facing the door. So it's like, bam, right in your face. So that's exactly what happened. I saw Whitley Strieber's Communion and it was like, bam, right in my face, and I like, oh my God. And I ran over and I picked up the book and I almost dropped my daughter because when I saw that being on the cover of that book, I had a heart attack, like not literally, but I thought, oh my God, this is the being. And so I opened up the cover leaf and I read a little bit about what it was about and I bought it right away and I read it in one day. When I started reading that book, I felt like he was writing a book about my experiences. And I never in my lifetime had heard anybody talk about this kind of stuff before. So I was scared to death and thrilled at the same time because I couldn't believe that all the things that I thought were dreams were not, they were actually real. And so I just had this, like the Rolodex went backwards in my head and I'm going through the files and I'm like, wait a minute. So he's saying then that thing that happened to me when I was 4 was not a dream. You know what I mean?
So, and prior to that, to you, you're going, oh boy, I sure had some odd dreams when I was younger.
Yes. And what's funny is I always had such vivid dreams and I always recalled my dreams. And I also was, I remember when I was in 4th grade, I remember having a note sent home with me from my 4th grade teacher for my mom. And when I brought it home and she opened it up and she kind of looked at it and shook her head and looked at me. And I said, what? And am I in trouble? And she says, no, honey, your teacher just says that you like to tell a lot of stories that might not be true. Now, I loved my 4th grade teacher and she always listened to me. I'm wondering if maybe she had said something to my mom to the effect of, are these things real? And maybe she had like alluded to some of the things that I had been telling her, but my mom never told me, so I don't know. but I'm wondering if maybe I confided in her about my dreams or something, and they were obviously maybe very vivid. That might have seemed real. So I'm not sure. Anyway, so getting back to the Whitley Strieber, reading on about all these experiences that he had had, and one of them in particular that I will get to later, just hit me in the stomach like a punch in the gut. And I quickly wrote him an 11-page letter that I didn't have his address, so I sent it to his publisher, but it was returned, unfortunately. And I was really bummed about that because I put my heart and soul into it because I felt like he was kindred and I really wanted to connect with him. Sadly, that didn't happen. So getting to the bullet points then, the first thing that I remembered after reading his book was an experience or a dream that I thought I had had when I was 4, when I was living in Pasadena, California. And I remember in this dream that I was being carried by a bunch of what I presume to be little children, and they were carrying me back to my bed. And it was like I was on my back and they were underneath me, and almost like they were the gurney, and I was walking down my hall, or they were walking down my hallway and then into my bedroom. And then they laid me down into my bed and pulled up the covers of my sheets up to my neck, and I went to sleep. And then the next morning, I woke up and I saw my mom and I said, "Hey, Mama, I need a Band-Aid for my belly button." And she said, "What do you mean you need a Band-Aid for your belly button?" And I said, "Mommy, I just need a Band-Aid." And I was adamant. And she says, "Well, what are you talking about?" And I said, "Well, they told me that if I didn't put a Band-Aid on my belly button, that it would get infected." And my mom looked at me like, "Who told you?" And I said, "From my dream." And she just rolled her eyes and went and got a Band-Aid and just to appease me, gave it to me. And I put it on and walked away. And we never talked about it again. So, I mean, now knowing what I do about experiences where people have experiments performed on them, I'm very curious if something was done to me based on the details of that, and subsequently have been very afraid of needles my entire life.
Now, how many times did you have this quote unquote dream?
That was the only one that I remember.
Mm.
So I don't know.
I was holding my stomach when you were talking about your belly button.
I know, I cringe every time I talk about it.
Yeah, I don't know. There's just something about that because I mean, I know this. It's a lot of stuff, poking and prodding and things like Travis Walton and all of that. But for you at 4 to just be so adamant about, hey, no, they told me I need to cover this or it would get infected. You were extremely serious about this. I mean, your mom's probably going, well, how cute. She's having these little dreams and hopefully it doesn't continue because she seems maybe a little scared. I mean, yeah, were you scared when you woke up or you just knew like, hey, I need a Band-Aid. Give me a Band-Aid.
Well, yeah, it was very matter of fact. And, all these years, like racking my brain and trying to make sense of everything and thinking about this moment and thinking about, okay, so here I am in this situation. And if I had seen these little beings or whatever, at 4, you don't really have anything to compare it to. So there's really not much to be alarmed by, especially if you think you're dreaming. And I also think that a lot of children who might have these encounters for the same thing think, oh, look at that little kid over there. Or, maybe they shapeshift into a child to make them feel more comfortable. Who knows? But I really had no fear whatsoever. And at the time was not afraid of the fact that maybe I did have a needle in me because I don't think that I was aware of it. Or I would have, but I think subconsciously I am aware of it because I have this aversion of the needles.
And Suzanne,
So,
do you know for a fact that these actually did look like human children, or just because you were 4 and they were small, you just in your head they were children, but maybe they didn't really look like human kids?
I don't really remember even what they looked like because they were underneath me. And I think that when they put me back in bed, I don't know if I was still paralyzed or maybe I was drugged because I didn't even look at them in the face. I just had the sensation of the hands pulling up the sheets, and then I passed out. So that's all I remember.
And we do hear this dichotomy of experiences like this where it can be something quite terrifying, which thankfully you didn't have, but it can be something quite terrifying, even up to and including experiments and physical things that go on that are not pleasant. And then they took you back to your room and to your house, and then they essentially tuck you in.
Right, right.
That's
Very odd.
quite the
Yeah,
dichotomy. Yeah, they're like, well, we're going to
right.
take you, but when we bring it
Yeah.
back, it'll be this nice thing. So, and
Well, for the next time, so you're not so afraid.
right. Yeah, and we're, if they do look hideous at all, we've heard this a lot. They do seem to put in what a lot of people refer to as screen memories, right? So you're not quite as terrified.
Mhm.
And I think my very last guest mentioned Captain Crunch or something, right? Like he's like, I feel like,
Yeah.
because I was into Captain Crunch as a kid, and it kind of looked like Captain Crunch. At least that's what my brain told me this thing was. Maybe so he didn't freak out. Maybe there's something to that. Maybe if you freak out, the experiment is ruined somehow. I don't know.
Maybe they just can't control the
Yeah.
child because they would just be screaming their heads off and, flailing about, and it could be dangerous.
The communion cover has come up time and again when we talk about this stuff, and it has been mentioned that it is the catalyst for a lot of people. When they see it,
Mhm.
something just gets sparked, something gets unlocked. And I don't know if it's still important to you to get your 11 pages to Whitley, but if you were still interested in doing that, it would be my pleasure to help you get that in his hands.
Well, we'll talk about that in a bit.
Yeah, yeah. If you want it, I'm just going to throw that out there.
No,
I'm
well,
not.
I actually have that in my story, so
Oh, perfect,
it'll come up. Yes,
perfect,
yes.
perfect. Well, yeah, that's a heck of a thing to kind of be jarred into your memory, especially.
Yeah.
Well, you know what? I'm going to save that question because that's probably going to come up later too. So, see, I'm already starting with tangents here, Suzanne. But yeah,
That's
continue
okay.
wherever you want to go next.
Okay, so, then I started thinking about, okay, in my life, how, all these strange things that had happened to me, I was trying to compartmentalize them into different areas of what I thought was a dream and what was real. I remember having dreams of being in like Egypt with my dad when I was a little child, and I would watch him walk off to work, and we were in the desert, and it was very windy and hot, and but it was so vivid and so real. So I'm like, okay, that was probably a dream, but I still remember that. But it's still a dream, but it seemed real. But then all this other stuff, not so much, because following that visitation, I was in preschool at the time, and I ended up one day. We were inside, and it was nap time, which I hated. I was always a very active child, so I hated to be told when to take a nap. So, but I did know that after nap time, it was recess, which I loved. So I just lay there and just da, 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 and then finally it was over, and then it was time for recess. And I was kind of I don't know, a loner kind of a kid, maybe. Because I don't know, I just never really felt like I fit in with a lot of the other kids. And so a lot of times I would just play in the yard by myself. And I was wandering along the fence, and I saw that there was a hole in the fence, and I went, ooh. So, being the curious child that I was, I decided to walk through the hole in the fence into the field behind the preschool. And it was pretty overgrown with weeds, but I just kept walking towards this, what looked like an abandoned shack in the middle of the field. And when I walked inside, it looked like it might have been like an old stable because there was a bridle hook and an old bridle and a saddle stand in the middle. It was kinda rickety, like, you could see through all this wooden slats, and there was weeds growing inside of it, and so I was just kinda looking around, and then I looked up into the rafters, and I saw an owl, and I remember going, "Is that an owl?" And the minute that I said that, there was this really high-pitched buzzing sound, almost like, I don't know if you're familiar with the sound of cicadas,
Mm-hmm.
but it sounded like that. And it was so loud and it's so sudden that I plugged my ears. But when I plugged my ears, it felt like it was coming from inside my head. So I was very confused and I got on my knees and kind of crouched up into a ball and continued to plug my ears until it went away. And I shut my eyes and I just sat there. And when it finally went away, I took my fingers out of my ears and opened my eyes and it was dark. I don't know what happened. I thought, did I fall asleep? Oh my God, I'm in trouble. All these things. And I just ran outside the barn and I heard people calling my name and I heard my mother's voice distinctly. I ran out and she came over and grabbed me by the arm and smacked me and said, "You're in trouble. Why were you hiding?" And I said, "What? I don't know what happened." I tried to explain to her what happened. And she didn't want to hear any of it. And she just basically said, "Wait until your father gets home. You're going to get a whipping." So I don't know what happened, but now after reading many stories about screen memories, like you had said, thinking that maybe that owl wasn't an owl at all. So I'm very aware that that is a big screen memory.
Wow. Okay. So yeah, between the owl, the buzzing sound that you thought was outside, but it was actually more inside, and then, as you say, is it missing time or is it you fell asleep? Either way, it's not good because it got you in a whole lot of trouble.
Yeah. And we never talked about it again. I did get in trouble when I got home, but it was never brought up. It was kind of weird.
Really?
It was kind of like all these things put to the wayside. I don't know. I don't know.
Even years
So,
later, because I know your mom's going to come up later. Maybe
yeah,
again, I'm probably jumping ahead, but I mean, years
no
later,
worries.
you guys never talked about that stuff.
No, no, no. It's weird. It's just weird. But maybe, I don't know. Maybe she was a very shy person. And so, and I mean, my parents didn't have the best marriage. So she was, my father, they divorced when I was a teenager, and he definitely had his way that he wanted his wife to be, and maybe it was silent. So I
Right.
don't think she questioned a lot of things. So,
Right.
but, and at that time, actually, when we did live in Pasadena, my father, he worked for JPL. My grandfather worked at Caltech on the Apollo 11 mission and made the first hammer that went to the moon. I always thought that was kind of cool little tidbit to share with my friends.
That is very
um,
cool. When I read that bullet point, I'm like, that is very, very unique. And yeah, I mean, working on the stealth project and then working grandfather working for Caltech for Apollo
right.
11 and that hammer thing, I was like, that's a good triple threat right there.
I know. I just, I never really thought about it until again, many years later, but I thought it was important to bring up because my father, he, when he worked for JPL, they sent him away a lot, and we never were allowed to know where he went. He would be gone for like 6 weeks at a time. He was very smart. Then when my grandparents actually immigrated here from Denmark in 1956. So for my grandfather to have that type of a job after only living in, the States for what, 8 years, and then he didn't speak any English. It was a very odd thing, and I really, didn't have the wherewithal to ask him how that could come to be when I was younger, and sadly, he's since passed on. But I always thought that was quite curious, and then in 1969, we moved about 40 miles north of Los Angeles to a little town called Newbury Park, which is in Ventura County. It's in the Thousand Oaks, Westlake Village area, if you're not familiar. And he got a job working for Northrop. There, he actually was working on the stealth project and designed the brains for the missiles for the stealth bomber. And so again, like you said, having all this military-ish stuff in my familial background, I thought was quite fascinating as I listened to a lot of people's stories talking about, government programs being involved in the UFO phenomenon and potentially maybe that could have something to do with the things that were happening in my life, but I had no proof. So I didn't want to go down a rabbit hole, because that would lead to nowhere, you know? So I opted not to delve into that too much because I didn't want to drive myself crazy.
Well, you know, Suzanne, it's funny because before we officially started, you brought up, well, I don't know if my stories would fit on ITF, and then because you kept happened to coming across the cryptid shows, but then you came across Leo's for High Strange Ojai, and his very last part 3, I think he mentioned that very same thing about the family always having ended up in or around the military bases. And he had brought that up to his family. Like, did you guys know, like, realize that you had lived around all these bases at some point? And so maybe there is some kind of a tie-in there. I mean, that's a short list of people that get to work for, you know, your father with the stealth program and at JPL and all these things. Smart dude, by the way. And so is your grandfather. I mean, to have worked on Apollo 11 and to designed things that that they actually used up there is incredible. So that's a really short list to be on.
Right, it is. It's very odd. So when we lived in New Ray Park, I remember this is really funny when we were moving there. And we were driving to our new house for the first time and, you know, driving our Rambler station wagon down Highway 101 northbound. And I just remember it like it was a movie. In fact, I think we took a Super 8 of it. You know what I mean? And we're driving along the highway, and we get off the freeway, and then we go down the street, and then we go pull up onto our cul-de-sac where our new house was. I looked right at the cul-de-sac, and my first thing I said in my head was, "This is the perfect place for a craft to land." And I'm like, why would I say that? You know, in my head. And it wasn't even alarming. It was just like matter of fact, you know? Now, I have to admit that when I moved there, I started reading a lot of sci-fi at a very young age. For whatever reason, it just fascinated me. I was an avid reader. I would read, you know, Carl Sagan, Isaac Asimov, Michael Crichton, Ray Bradbury, just whatever I could get my hands on, going to the library and checking out as many books as I could. I was very fascinated with vampires. I know it sounds very weird, but I used to leave my window open so a vampire could come in when I was a kid. And
Yikes.
don't ask me why. But I think it has something to do with, and I'll talk about this. I think there was a correlation when I started doing a lot of research, and one of them was into Whitley Strieber, actually, when he wrote The Hunger. And I'm not sure if you were familiar with the fact that he did write that fiction novel along with The Wolfen prior to Communion. The Hunger was about vampires, and I was always curious if there was a correlation to what we might have thought were vampires were really ET. You know, as a child, maybe my fascination with vampires had something to do with my experiences. Being as they would come in and, you know, in the night and for whatever reason, they made me feel like they were very benevolent and that my experiences were benevolent, and so I would leave the window open type of thing. So I don't know how you feel about that, but I always thought that was kind of strange.
You know, one of the most terrifying portions of Stephen King's Salem's Lot happens to have like this scene where there's the vampire outside the window kind of a thing, right? And he tap, 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 kind of a let me in situation. Again, to spit out the word dichotomy, but your experiences versus someone else's, I wonder, and I want to get your feedback on this because you are actually so far as to go, man, this is a great place for a craft to land, and you're leaving your window open. And this is after you had this experience with, quote unquote, them carrying you, whoever they are, whatever they are, back to your bed and tucking you in, even though you had known that they had done something because you asked for the Band-Aid. So yours is benevolent, but we hear a lot of malevolent encounters with these things where people are absolutely terrified and they're keeping lights on and they don't sleep and, you know, they don't want to have any more contact with these things. Do you think, like, what's the difference there? Do you think it's the screen memory thing? It glitched out. It really screwed up for those people that think those are malevolent because they didn't implant the right things as far as the memory goes, and they're remembering too much about the bad stuff, and you just simply don't, or they maybe had a completely different experience than you did, just all in all.
I think there's a lot of factors to consider. And I mean, obviously, when you're that young, I think now there's like an evolution of the consciousness with a lot of experiencers. But I think at that age, we're not really that aware of our consciousness per se. And I have heard of a lot of people who have had, these malevolent experiences where, and I think of Travis Walton too. I think about him, fighting,
Yeah.
one and all of that. And I don't I know I per se have not had that experience, but I think a lot of it has to do with your own issues. I think that really has something to do with your own internal turmoil per se, maybe where you are in your life at the time you're having the experiences. I think about poltergeist activity. When people have a lot of poltergeist activity in their home, they have, a lot of unrest. So I think there's a correlation with that along with ET. And that's why I think that, as you have touched a lot of times as well, that all these things are connected somehow. So I think that maybe that could be why some people have more of a benevolent experience. And, it's not like all love and light and, fairies and rainbows or anything like that. But, a lot of I don't really have any memory of negative traumatic experience, and maybe it's just my frame of mind, or maybe I've only remembered what I've wanted to remember,
Mm-hmm.
and you know what, that serves me just fine. I think that if there were negative things that have happened to me, I don't want to know. It wouldn't serve me. What could I get from it that would serve me positively in my life?
Right. Absolutely. Well, and going back to your original thought of this whole vampire thing and ETs, and I mean, there is a vampiric element to, if you go off the classic ET contact with a person, it is extremely vampiric, right? They take you, you don't have any control over that. It's against your will most of the time. And then when they're done with you, they spit you back out. They're done with you and see you later, or maybe not. I
Right.
mean, to
Right.
you only had that one, what you are perceiving as a physical interaction with beings. That was the only one time. And I've heard that before. I know that you have too. While others, they'll have it monthly or weekly, or it'll go in cycles, whatever it is.
Mm. Well, that brings me to my next experience. When I was living there on that house on the cul-de-sac, one night I was laying in bed and I saw a bright light shine in through my window, and I had shutters, and so it was like the slats were on the other side of the wall. So I peeked out the window and I had a panic attack because I saw like a floodlight shining in my window. And so I ran and hid in the bathtub. When I did so, I said, "Why am I hiding here? They're gonna find me anyway." And then it was black. Then I was out. And the next thing I knew, I was being carried back to my bed again. So that experience, I did have fear. I don't know why. I was a little bit older. Maybe as you get older, you start remembering more or having the fear, like unlike I did when I was 4. I'm not quite sure. So I just really tried to figure out what was going on, and still thinking it was a dream, but I thought, no, me getting up and looking out the window was not a dream. Me going into the bathtub was not a dream. Me being in bed and having the covers pulled up to my neck was not a dream. But I just didn't have anybody to talk to about it because I'd never heard anybody talk about this kind of stuff before. I didn't know if I was the only one. I didn't want to find out if I wasn't. Or I'm sorry, I didn't want to find out if I was the only one. So, I just kept it to myself. And then one night, I had this incredible experience that I'd never had before, where I woke up on a craft. Now, when I say that, I know it sounds really, unreal, but I literally was asleep and I woke up and I was on a craft. I looked around, I was in the middle of this huge room. In the perimeter was it was like a I don't want to say control panel, but it looked like a ledge. And the ledge was circular and it was smooth and it was all along the perimeter of the round room. And behind this ledge, it looked like the lights were behind it. So it was backlit. And so the light was just shining up behind the ledge and it just encompassed the entire room. So all the lighting was indirect. And then I saw a bunch of grays. Okay, that was the first time I had actually seen a gray and remembered it. And it didn't freak me out, okay, which is bizarre. I'm seeing the backs of their heads, and they're all working on something, like, on this, shelf. I think it was like a control panel, but there were no buttons. So they were just moving their hands around, and there was nothing there, and I thought, "Well, that's really strange." And then I looked at the very end on my left, and at the very end of this one ledge where they're all working were 2 beings, but they were human. And although they weren't facing me, one of them had long blonde hair, it was a girl, and the other one was a boy, and he had a short haircut, so I felt they were human. And the the girl had on a red jumpsuit and the boy had on a blue jumpsuit, and they're the only ones that turned around and looked at me, and when they did, they just did not look 100% human. There was something about their eyes that just didn't look normal. And I don't know if they were just bigger or if they were slanted. I can't remember exactly. But then they turned around and just kept on doing what they were doing. And I'm just like, huh, okay. And like, I'm not even freaking out. I still can't believe this to this day. So right next to them, there was an archway. All of a sudden, through the archway, in comes this enormous being. Now, granted, I was only 9, so I wasn't that tall, but he was enormous. I say he because I felt it was a male energy. And he didn't walk in the room. He glided in the room, glided past me, and then ended up on my right-hand side and turned around to face me. He had a big bulbous head with like these 3, like, I don't want to say creases in his forehead, but they look like bumps maybe. Like a caveman would have like a brow bone, but 3 times. And he had big, slanted, wraparound eyes, little tiny mouth. He looked like he might be a gray, but he almost looked almost like a cross between a gray and a mantis being.
Mm.
That's the best way I can describe it. And he had on a long cape that looked like it was made out of like liquid mercury. It looked like it was moving, like it was alive, or like shimmering, like it was full of stars, or I don't know. It just looked like it was liquid or flowing, like fluid. And he had a green amulet holding this cape together. And I remember standing there in my nightgown staring at him, and he just starts speaking to me telepathically. And the first thing that he did was impress on me a symbol, and it was in my head. And I saw it in my head, and I spoke to him telepathically. I realized that this is how our communication was going to be because I just thought something and he would answer me. And so I said to him, "I don't understand." And he said to me telepathically, "You will when it is time." Then all of a sudden, in between us, a three-dimensional hologram that was almost like a cube dropped down in between us. And in between the cube wall or edges was it looked like a three-dimensional algebraic equation. Okay. So it's like if you're looking at a math problem on a chalkboard, but then you turn to the side on another side, you could actually see it going through to the other side. So not it was like a three-dimensional equation. So I'm like, "Whoa, this is like really involved math." And I'm said, "Okay, I'm not good at math at all, so I definitely do not understand this." And he again said, "You will understand it when it is time." And I said, "Okay." And then he said to me something that I will never forget. And that is that the cure for cancer is something that we use every day and that we are trying too hard to figure it out. And I looked at him and I chuckled and I'm like, "Oh, you mean like toothpaste?" And he kind of laughed back at me, said, "Yeah, like that." But this is all telepathic communication. And then I realized, oh my God, he's kind of like having a sense of humor, you know, which was odd. But in retrospect, that comment I always thought was really strange because my reaction to it was kind of like, so, like, I don't know, I wasn't really taking it very seriously because at 9, I don't really think we really think about cancer a lot, or we really don't talk about it. And so I was like, "Oh, okay," you know? But thinking about it now, I mean, that's quite remarkable. And so, again, been trying to rack my brain what it could be. So then he said, "Follow him." And so I followed him as he glided across the floor through the archway, and I followed him down a curved, hallway, and through that curved hallway, there were, little arched openings on my right for, like, all these little rooms in a row, and on the 3rd one, we stopped, and when we stopped and turned and look inside, I saw a bunch of kids around my age, and they were all facing the wall. But on the wall, there was a holographic, or right in front of the wall was a holographic, slideshow of all the things that have happened on the earth and that were gonna happen on the earth, like, floods and famine and earthquakes and fire and just catastrophe, just, like explosions, war, death, just and it was just like almost like they were doing the slides so quickly, like it was subliminal. It was almost like so quick that you couldn't really even make out what the images were. But you kinda could because you saw patterns, so I almost felt like they were trying to impress it in their brains like a stamp that they would leave and take it with them. Thinking about it now, I'm thinking, I wonder if they were taking all these kids around my age at that time to try and help the earth later in lives in their, adult years to try and solve the world's problems that were going to be. Like the next generation of I don't wanna say quote unquote "star children," but, that comes to mind when people say that. So
Oh, I
and
mean,
then
yeah, just think of the other two that you thought were human, but their eyes just look slightly different, right?
slightly off, yes, slightly off.
What
And
did the symbol look like? Just real quick before I forget that.
oh, okay, well, I have it written down, I could actually share it with you in an email if you'd like to share it.
That would be amazing because then I could
Yeah,
maybe put that in show notes. Maybe that'll jog someone's memory. You never know.
that's yes, I've been trying for so many years to try and find somebody who could read it, or what it looks like is, it looks like a circle on one end, and then it has I mean, it looks a lot like a crop circle, to be quite honest. But I have looked at crop circles and never found this exact pattern. But I don't know if you know what? It's hard to explain. I'll just have to share it with you. But it looks like a circle on one end, and then there's like a curved line, and then a couple of straight slashes, and then another curved line. So it looks like a crop circle.
Yeah, I would love to see
That's how I
that.
can
And yeah,
describe it.
maybe if we put it out there in the ether, someone will
Yeah,
recognize that. And boy, wouldn't it be incredible to find another one of those kids that was on board the
I know.
craft?
Yes, that's why I need to talk about this stuff. So, he told me to follow him again, and we went back into the original room where we were in the beginning, and I just looked at him and I said, "I just don't understand. Like, I don't understand why am I here?" He said to follow him again, so we went to the edge of the craft, and he waved his arm across the wall, and it like if you were wiping off the condensation of a window, and when he did that, it became transparent and I could see the earth. And I'm like, "Oh, I get it now." I realized what was happening, and I all of a sudden zipped back into my body and I woke up. And that was that.
And see what's the difference between the experience it for when they're actually carrying you all the way back to bed and tucking you in, why were you just back there?
Yeah.
You know? Why?
Yep. I don't know. I think I think that it's almost like I was evolving into the next phase of the visitation experience, like education. Do you know what I mean?
That's a really good way to think about that. I mean, when you're little, you kind of need help doing a lot of things. So maybe they feed into that and they know that.
Right. And so maybe I was shown by having this experience shown that there was nothing to be afraid of. And by zipping back into my bed by myself and being a big girl and tucking myself in. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like I was growing up.
Right. Like here's the information, at least as much as we can give you, and now you just need to go back. So at no point in time, when you see the kids, you see the kind of off-base humanish things, you see all the grays, you see this other being who's talking to you telepathically. You were never ever frightened, not at all.
Not one bit. It's so weird. It is, I almost felt like the big being, I call him the emperor because he was so majestic. I almost felt like familiar. I don't want to say familial with him, but I felt like he was just emanating so much love and joy that there was no fear. And maybe he was just love bombing me, but maybe that's why I wasn't afraid.
Well, we were talking in the emails about Heather's episode and Shanna's episodes, and Shanna's experiences are, and Heather's too, like all of you guys have kind of this undulating differences in experiences, but they're also very much alike in many ways too. Shanna has also seen a mantis type being in her home, but that thing is horrifying to her.
Yep, I've seen that, but we'll get to that.
Mm.
So yeah. So then, right around that same time, I had this is fun. I worked at a ranch. I went there after school, and in exchange for working at the ranch and cleaning the horses and giving them their medicine and stuff, I could board my horse there for free. So that was really cool. One day, I was riding up in the hills up the fire break to the water tower, which is a normal trail ride that I would do. I'm walking along, and all of a sudden, I see this man standing in the middle of the road, and he's just standing there, and he has long brown hair. He's wearing a long white flowing robe, and he has his hands outstretched but down with his palms facing me. And so I stop my horse and we just sit there, and I look at him and I'm like, is this Jesus? He looked like what we depict Jesus to look like. But I thought, okay, this is really strange because is he a ghost? Because he just stood there. And then all of a sudden he turned and just started walking up this hill that was like a steep, steep bank. And then he just vanished into thin air. And I thought he had crawled over the backside, but he couldn't have because the backside of that was a sheer cliff. So I don't know if that was just an entity or if, all these other experiences, I was starting to see other things,
Right.
I don't know, but it was definitely freaking. I did not tell anybody about it because I thought I was losing my mind.
Right, as you say, like, is this a ghost or is this tied into the ET stuff? Like, what is this?
Right. And I was probably about 14 at the time. I'm guessing 14 or 15. So, and then for, many years, during that time living there, I didn't really have a lot of experiences that I remember, but I was really into, like like I said before, I read a lot of science fiction. And one of the people that I babysat for, the dad, was a huge sci-fi buff. So I loved babysitting for them. And I read so much stuff, and like he subscribed to like Omni magazine. And so I think that I was really just, trying to figure out, is something going on with me, and does it have something to do with sci-fi stuff because it just seems so strange. And then I thought, well, what if it's God? What if that man I saw was an angel? So I began to really look into religion, and I started buying, a lot of religious literature and started going to church regularly. I went from church to church to church, and I was like a Presbyterian, then I was born again Christian, then I was Catholic, Seventh-day Adventist, then I became Mormon. And I realized that no, there was nothing in any of those churches that was remotely close to what I was experiencing. So then I thought, well, maybe it's witchcraft. And so then I started delving into witchcraft, which was a huge mistake. I
What? No,
just
why?
started
Why do you
reading.
say that?
Well, because I started, doing all the things that you're not supposed to do, like playing with the Ouija board and casting spells and, just
Was it
and
working?
then oh yeah. Oh yeah. So I had when I was living in that house, same time frame, I actually had a best friend I started confiding in, and we started doing witchcraft together and started, casting spells on boys that we didn't like at school, and like that they would get bad grades and just like stupid stuff as you do as a teenager. But I remember one time we had written some spells and buried them in the yard. And one night I had gotten up in the middle of the night to get a glass of water. And I looked in the backyard and I saw where I had buried those things. I saw smoke coming out of the ground. And I promptly said, okay, you know what? I don't think I should do this anymore. And so
Wow.
I did the one thing that you're not supposed to do, and that is I burned my Ouija board.
Uh-oh.
I know. So I didn't know at the time you weren't supposed to do that, but I did. But oh well, I guess nothing that bad happened. But I also, interestingly enough, when I was checking out books on witchcraft, I also checked out a book on electromagnetics, and I didn't even know what it meant, but something told me to read it, and so I did. And I think it had something to do with the craft. So I don't know. I just thought that was kind of odd. Here I am, what, 11 years old, getting, 11 books on witchcraft and one on electromagnetics.
Well, that and your complete, total, utter fascination with sci-fi and vampires, and right. I mean,
Well, yeah, maybe.
it was just
Yeah. See,
all encompassing for you. Which I mean, who could blame
right,
you with the kinds of things that were going on?
right, for sure, for sure. And then, like I said, nothing really happened for many years. And then that I can remember. I mean, I do remember, well, I should take that back. One weird thing started happening, and I started having precognitive dreams. That was kind of bizarre because one time in particular, I remember I was probably about 17 years old and I was getting ready for work in the morning. Oh no, I'm sorry, let me backtrack. I had a dream that was watching, like I was watching a movie, okay? And it was like I was a witness to something that was going to happen. And what it was there was this small car and it was joyriding on a golf course at night. And it was like a little Volkswagen Beetle. I don't know if you remember what those look like, but
Mm-hmm.
or a Volkswagen Rabbit or something. I'm sorry. It's a little bit more square looking.
Right.
I ended up watching this car just careening through this golf course and hit a tree. It's like it was real, but it was like I was watching a movie, like I said. And then all of a sudden, the driver gets out and it's a guy, but he's screaming and crying because in the passenger side was his girlfriend and she was killed. And I thought, "Oh my god," and I'm watching him, like, get on the grass, and he's crying, and he tries to pull her out, but the car's all crunched up, and then I just woke up from that nightmare and couldn't shake it, and I was, like, getting ready for work, and when I would get ready for work in the morning, I would always read the local paper. The headline of the local paper was that there was a couple of kids joyriding on the golf course, and they had crashed into a tree, and the girl had passed away.
Oh my God.
I didn't know what to think about it because I'd never had an experience like that before. And so I told my mom, and she's like, "Oh, you don't, it's just not real. You must have seen something before, or whatever." And I'm thinking, no, Mom, I completely had this dream. So, yeah, that was the beginning of many similar dreams.
I mean, that is so
Um,
stunningly specific. Like for you to just
yes.
randomly pull that out of your head and be spot on with that, I don't know what the odds are, but no, that's crazy.
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
mean, what did you really, you must have been absolutely, what do you even think when something like that happens?
I'm losing my mind,
You're like,
you
why can't
know?
this work for the lottery? Like, what the hell?
Right, exactly. So that was like 1975. No, wait, I take that back. Like 1978, maybe. And then a couple years later, I was like maybe 24, 25, maybe that I'm going to jump ahead a few years. I was a hairdresser, and at the time I was Mormon. I actually did get married, and I married a Mormon guy. We had a baby. Long story short, it ended very quickly. We had an unfortunate thing happen. He became addicted to drugs, and I separated from him when my daughter was a month old. And I was working in this hair salon, but I still knew a lot of people from the church. And one day I was just working, and I do this again. I need to backtrack. The night before I had this experience, I had a dream. I dreamed that I saw my eighth grade boyfriend, Benji, who was Mormon. I dreamed that he walked up to me and he was wearing a white t shirt and denim overalls. And it was like so real. It's like he was really there. And I'm like, oh my gosh, Benji, it's so nice to see you. And I went over and I gave him the biggest hug, and it was like I could really feel him when I was hugging him in the dream. When I woke up, I was like, "Wow, that was so nice to see Benji," and just kind of made my day. And I went to work, and I had my first client, and I was wrapping her permanent wave, and I said, "I had the weirdest dream last night." And as I start telling her this dream, I was stopped by somebody walking by the window, and this person who walked by the window was somebody from my church who was a musician, and there was a music store next to the shop. So he was returning some amplifiers from a show that they had had the night before. And so he walked by and he put his finger up to me like, 1 minute, hold on, just wait a minute. And so he went and he put the amps away and then came into the salon. I said, "Oh my gosh, Tim, how are you?" And he's like, "I'm doing great." And I said, "What's up?" And he goes, "I just want to know if you remember this guy." And when he opened the door, in walked Benji, my eighth grade boyfriend, wearing a white t-shirt and denim overalls, just like my dream the night before that I was
What?
just telling my client. And so I went up and I gave him a big hug, just like the dream. I said, "I have to do this." And so I gave him a hug. I'm like, "It's so good to see you." And then I told him, I said, "You're not going to believe this. I just dreamed about this very moment last night."
What in the actual hell? That is so cool, Suzanne. And he's even in
I
the
know.
same outfit.
Yes.
What the hell?
I don't know.
Wow.
I don't know.
Yeah. See,
So,
the difference between you and Shanna and Heather, and then you guys are over here, and then people like me are on the other side. That's not going to happen to me. I'll tell you that. You
you
guys have
never
something
know.
special. I'm telling you, you guys do. And it doesn't always manifest very nicely, as Shanna will tell you, and in a couple cases,
Mhm.
Heather. But I mean, things like this precognitive thing is fascinating to me.
Just don't know how and why, but I always thought maybe it has something to do with all the other stuff. Since I didn't have an answer for it, but obviously the brain is so complex and there's so much we don't know
Mm-hmm.
about dreams. But I've been reading a lot lately about dreams being parallel realities and that we visit these, other realities when we're sleeping, and which would make a lot of sense based on another experience I had, which I'll get to later. But yeah, this precog stuff, I think is it like remote viewing, but it happened prior, so maybe not. So I don't know. I have no idea.
Have you ever looked into or tried to astral project or anything like that?
I have. In fact, I did actually leave that out. I remember vividly leaving my body while I was sleeping around that same time when I was a young child, or like between 9 and 15, around there, and flying around my neighborhood, seeing my house. And I also remember flying around a grocery store and seeing some of my neighbors grocery shopping, which I don't know, thought it was just a crazy dream, but who knows? How do you know if you're really astral projecting or not, if it's just a dream? I've, been tucked into my bed so many times to think, what's real and what's a dream. I don't know.
See, so what is it, the chicken or the egg, right? Are they attracted?
I know,
Are they
exactly.
attracted to you because you have these? I'm going to call them gifts. That's just the easiest way to blanket everything, good or bad. They're gifts, right? Or did they start to contact you and, in essence, again, lack of a better term, give you these gifts, right?
Right. Yes, exactly. And I also remember I have a recollection. I don't know where it fits in, of being in a craft and landing on very dewy grass and hearing the grass on the bottom of the craft as we were landing. And I don't know if that's just a memory from something, or if it's just a weird dream, but I just, for whatever reason, recalled that
That's
right
cool.
around the time that I was doing a lot of astral projecting.
Mm.
So I guess the next experience is happening in 1987. So that was when my daughter was 1, and it was the experience with seeing Whitley's book that we had touched on earlier. When I did bring that book home, I brought it to my mother's house because she was going to babysit for me. And so I had the book out, and she saw the book cover, which I don't know if you're familiar with the actual being that's on the cover, but I think it was the first time that that actual being was depicted in that manner. But when my mother saw that face, she looked right at me and said, I can astral project, right?"
Mm.
And I went, "No, you've never told me." And she says, "Oh yeah, and also my parents and we all saw UFOs together." And I said, "Really?" But then she just turned around and walked away, and we never talked about it. It's like she never talked about it. She just wanted to put it out
Mm.
there and walk away. It's like now somebody else knows about it, and now I don't have to talk about it. That's how
Wow.
I felt.
That's so matter of fact, right?
It was so weird. But I hadn't really talked to anybody about my experiences at that point, so I definitely had not told my mom. I hadn't told my ex-husband because we had just gotten divorced, and we didn't have that kind of relationship at that point where I felt like I could trust him with something so personal, oddly enough. But it was just, he was very conservative. He was Mormon, he was a cop, and he was from Texas. So he was really super conservative. So I just always kept that to myself.
Yeah, it's too bad you couldn't
So,
get your mom to expand upon that, right? Because when you think about the act of astral projecting, those kinds of things could also be tied to, before or after going on a craft and, being around
mm,
beings and, that there's kind
right.
of maybe a blurred line there a little bit, right? Or maybe they're just allowing you to remember certain parts of it. But in essence, it's the same, loosely the same thing. You're leaving your room and then you go do this and that up here and then you come back to your room. I mean, that's a very loose description of both of those things, obviously, but it'd just be nice to hear your mom expand upon that.
It would. Unfortunately, she's no longer with us. So,
And for her to admit
again,
also that she has seen UFOs. So you're kind of going, oh, hold on a second. Like maybe this does run in my family, which we hear all the
well,
time.
we do hear that. And so I really have a lot to say about that. And, we'll talk about that. But So at that point, I was still living in the Newbury Park, Thousand Oaks area. And then in 1988, I met a guy and we started dating, and I moved in with him in Ventura, California, which is very close to Ojai, where Leo is from. We were together for a year. After that year, he asked me to marry him. I was like really just so into my discovery of my experiences after just reading Communion not too long prior. I really wanted to get this marriage right. And so I decided that I was going to have full disclosure and be completely transparent with him about my experiences for the first time in my life. And I told him, I said, you know what? There's something I need to tell you about me. And I said, I have been having visitations from beings from I don't know where since I was a small child. They're still continuing. I don't have any control over them, and they might involve you. I'm telling you now that if that's a problem for you, then don't marry me. And he said, no, you know what? That's all right. I'm fine with it. And I said, great, which come to find out later he was lying, but that's another story. So we ended up getting married. We bought a house in Camarillo, California, which is right near where Leo was talking about Port Hueneme Naval Base. And so I lived under the flight path of that naval base, actually, which is interesting. But I was married to him in 1990. And shortly thereafter, things started ramping up at that house. And the first experience that happened that I can remember at that house was one night I was laying in bed and I saw a light shining in my backyard window. We had a second story bedroom. We didn't have the grass in yet. It was brand new. And we had 2 Alaskan Malamutes who were in the backyard. When I got up to see why the light was shining in my bedroom window, I looked down at my yard and there were 3 grays checking out my dogs who were passed out on the dirt. And one of them looked up and saw me, and I went, oh, crap. I'm busted. Like it saw me. And so I went into my bed, and that was it. It was like I knew that I was out like that. So something must have happened that I don't remember. And then the second time I had an experience that I remember from there was actually no, before this happened, we went to London on a business trip for my husband. And while we were there, we were in the theater district. I remember this room was beautiful. And I remember one night I was sleeping, and the next thing I knew, I was awake in the bathroom, laying on the floor in the middle of the night. And when I woke up, I had burn marks underneath my armpits and on my butt cheek. So I don't know what happened. I thought maybe I had an allergic reaction to something, but why was I laying on the floor in the bathroom? So that, I didn't tell him about it because I didn't want to freak him out. I just went back to bed and just didn't talk about the burns.
Didn't that freak you
Just
out?
tried, to say the least. But we're in London. I didn't want to like start anything or
Right.
be freaked out. And what's really strange is I have had past life dreams of being in England in the early 1600s. So I feel like a familial connection with England itself. And I do have ancestry there, but I'm talking about way, way, way back. Like I remember I felt like I had a drop in, like I was a drop in someone else's body in London, but that was like during the time of like Sherlock Holmes. I don't even remember when that is, like in the 1700s. I'm not sure.
Well,
So,
zipping back to the grays in the yard with the dogs.
Yeah.
How attentive and astute were these dogs? I mean, was it weird
They were passed out.
that they were passed out and not like up, like making noise and like who in the hell's in the yard? What the hell are these things?
Yes, they're the type of dog. Well, they're like kind of like wolves, you know what I mean? So
Right.
they have that type of temperament. So they definitely would not be passive if there were things checking them out.
Yeah, and then
So
not only that, you said
yeah,
one of them actually looked up at the window, and you're like, "Oh shit, that's great." That's
yeah, that's it. Yeah,
okay.
great. It's kind of like I felt like I rolled my eyes, like, okay, here we go again, type of thing, you know?
Well, we keep bringing up the phrase "screen memories," right? And this has been joked about in the past by lots of people. They're like, well, they screwed up again because I can remember this. Well, you can remember that. You can remember the grays in the yard and the dogs laying in the dirt, and that's weird, and then it looking up at the window. Why didn't it just go, if the Men in Black flashy thing you? I want a flashy thing you, Kay, and you won't remember. There you go, Kay. I mean, why didn't they do that?
Yeah.
It's so weird.
Yeah.
And again, it's just the millions of puzzle pieces that we just can't seem to put together. But I'm just kind of going, they come millions of light years or whatever they do, and they have these badass craft, and they can certainly make people forget or remember different things or remember it nice, tuck into bed.
Right.
Why would they let you remember that little scene? Because that's a very interesting scene to me.
Right. I almost felt like they were like looking in their ears and like taking samples and
Oh, wow.
so that was my feeling of what they were doing to the dogs. So
you just went to bed and went to sleep, or
yeah, just went to bed and went to sleep.
Okay, so that's also strange, right? Because you probably looking back, you're like, why didn't I go downstairs and check on the dogs and make sure the dogs don't have holes in them, them taking samples or whatever. So strange.
Right. Almost like it was like the power of suggestion. Maybe just like maybe they even said to me telepathically, go to sleep.
Right.
And so
nothing to see here.
I don't.
Night, Suzanne.
Yeah.
Like, okay,
so,
see you next week, I guess. Thanks a bunch. Were the dogs,
right.
I mean, so when you wake up from something like that the next day, do you instantly remember and you get up and you look out the window? Are they, and you're checking on the dogs and.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
In fact, I'm glad you brought that up because many times that would happen where I would get up and there would be something going on. And my fiance at the time was a very heavy sleeper, but sometimes he would wake up in the morning and we had kind of an inside joke. And he would say, did the visitors come last night? Because I slept like shit.
Really?
Yes. And it was kind of like tongue in cheek.
Right.
It was kind of like he would say it just to kind of make, like maybe he was so nervous about it that he had to make a joke about it. Do you know what I mean? And then I would say, you know what? Yeah, I think something happened, but I don't remember. Or I would say no, or I would say, yes, they did. He would never ask me what happened. He didn't want to know. He would just walk away.
But there was occasionally a correlation there between him sleeping horribly and you having some kind of an activity during the night. Did the dogs act strange the next day?
Although they did both die. Let me think about this. I just thought about that. They both died very close together, like within 6 months of each other.
And close to that, you seeing them laying in the dirt there?
No, they died much later. One of them died in 2006, and then the other one died like 6 months later.
Oh.
And they were both cancer related, so.
Really? And
yeah.
And how old were they when they passed, do you know?
Well, you know what? They were older. I mean,
who knows, right? It's like, but it's just at least worth mentioning. We don't know if that has anything to do with what you saw the little gray dudes doing, but it's worth mentioning.
This is true.
Yeah.
I mean, you hear about people having exposure to, craft that end up developing cancer and dying, so.
Right.
Who knows?
Well, yeah, those trees out at Travis Walton's site still grow at an increased rate.
It's true.
Yeah. Fascinating.
Yes. So then so that was like 1988. Okay, so the next year I had what I would consider my confirmation event. In 1989, my husband and I, or I'm sorry, my fiance at the time and I were engaged to be married the following year. My daughter was 3 years old. One night I was laying in bed and he was asleep and I couldn't fall asleep. I'm just staring at the ceiling, and all of a sudden, as I'm staring at the ceiling, I see what looks like all these different prismatic shapes, like squares and circles and triangles. And it's almost like if you had a crystal in your window and the light was refracting through it and it's shining on the wall. And you know how it gets like that prismy kind of rainbowy effect? Well, that's what I was seeing on the ceiling. And they were just swirling around and swirling around. And I'm thinking, what the heck is causing that? And so I'm looking at the window thinking, maybe there's a car driving down the street and it's shining the headlights through the window through something, and the light's refracting through the glass and making it appear that way. But when I went to look at the window, suddenly a gold disc flew over my body. And the disc was about 6 inches in diameter. And it just shot across my body, manifested into a woman on the left side of my body. Okay. And when I went to look at her, I realized I was completely paralyzed and the only thing I could move were my eyeballs. So I'm looking at her in my periphery and I could tell that she had long blonde hair, like way past her butt. I'm in my head trying to scream, but I couldn't scream. And so I'm thinking, oh my God, what is happening? She starts to speak to me telepathically, verbatim. Where I come from, marriage is the most sacred part of our existence, and I am giving you the chance to experience this if you wish. And I'm just freaking out, not even thinking about anything she had just said. My only thought is, in my mind, I'm thinking, I'm so glad you don't look like what you really look like, because if you did, I think I would freak out.
Mm.
And she says back to me, if you want to know what I look like, look out the window. So again, I'm paralyzed, but I can still look in my peripheral vision to my right to the window. And when I do, I see a gigantic mantis being hanging from my windowsill. And then I really want to scream because it's horrifying. And at that moment that I'm like frantically trying to scream in my head, my doorknob starts to shake. And she looks at the doorknob and just books it across the room and vanishes through the wall. And right as she vanishes through the wall, my bedroom door flies open and in walk 3 little Smurfy blue beings. And I am not joking. They looked like little, squatty, 3.5 foot tall Michelin men that were cobalt blue, like they were emanating light from the inside, like they were glowing. And they had little round black eyes, and they were standing at the end of my bed. And I just was looking down with my eyes. I couldn't move my head or anything. My fiance was still sleeping. And they say to me in unison, "It's Elise. We can't get her to stop throwing up." But it was all telepathic again. So Elise is my daughter. And the minute they mentioned my daughter's name, I had that whole fight or flight thing where I just broke free out of my paralysis and just jetted down the hall. And as I did, I could hear her crying in her bedroom. So I walk into her bedroom and she says, "Mommy, mommy, and she just starts projectile vomiting across the bed. And at that point, my fiance wakes up and he's like, "What's going on?" And I said, "Start the bathtub." So he starts the bathtub and I grab my daughter And I bring her into the bathroom and I hold her over the toilet and she's finishing getting sick. And then he washes her off while I change her sheets. And then when we get her all cleaned up, I bring her back in her bed and I lay down with her until she fell asleep. And when she does, I go back into bed and we both fall asleep like nothing happened. So in the morning, she was totally fine. I mean, she was a smile on her face and, we got up, we went downstairs and she sat at the kitchen table and I was making her breakfast. And as I was doing that, my fiance says to me, "Did the visitors come?" And I put my finger up to my mouth and I said, "Shh, don't say anything," because I didn't want her to hear anything. And I just said, "Don't." And so he didn't remember anything, obviously. So I brought her cereal over to the table. And when I set the bowl down, I looked down and saw she was drawing a picture. And she was drawing a picture of this little thing, and it looked like a little creature. And it had a round head. It had two lines where, on either side of its neck, it had two lines where the ears were, or should be. It had little round black eyes, a little tiny mouth, and a little squiggly thing over its head. So I said, "Oh, honey, that's really cute. What is that?" And she said, "Oh, mommy, it's the animal from my dream last night."
Mm.
And I just got this sick feeling in the pit of my stomach, but I didn't want her to see how afraid I was in this moment because I thought that something had really happened. So I just kept smiling and I kept prompting her. I said, "Oh, well, that's really pretty, honey. So what was it doing and what did it look like?" And she says, "Oh, well, there were three of them." I said, "Oh, really?" And I said, "Well, what's this little thing here?" And she goes, "Oh, well, those lines are where the ears should be, but they don't have any ears." I said, "Okay." I said, "Well, what were they doing?" She says, "Well, there were three of them and they were blue and they were smelling me and they were telling me that they loved me." And I just was trying not to lose it because I just really knew that what had happened the night before was real. Because how could she be describing these beings that I saw at the foot of my bed to a T? When I asked her what the squiggly line was over its head, she said, "Oh, it's a cloud, mommy. They come from the clouds."
Mm.
And I said, "Oh, that's really cute, honey." And I physically had to excuse myself from the room and go in the other room and I cried. I cried because I knew that this experience that I had been having my entire life that I had no control over was now involving my child. And there was nothing I could do about it. And who was I going to tell? And who am I? My child's being abducted. Okay. Beyond my control. And there's nothing I can do about it. Can I call the cops? No. You know what I mean? It's like, what do you do? There's nothing you can do. And I was horrified for her. So that was pretty much my confirmation event that all these things that have been happening were real.
Wow. I did not see that one coming, Suzanne, to be honest with you. Yeah, that's okay. So now's when it really takes a turn to a darker side of things. Because once they start messing with the kiddos, it's like, okay, that's not cool at all.
Exactly. And knowing what I know now about, I'm going to say, screen memories, and obviously, these beings that were blue at the foot of my bed, were they really what they were to her and to me, and them telling her, smelling her and telling her they loved her? What were they really doing? Which is, to me, that's horrifying.
Yeah. I don't like that very much. I don't like that. Why? Again, this is just a rhetorical question, of course, but why couldn't they have looked a little nicer than that? Because, and did she ever, it didn't seem like she was that afraid though.
She was, again, She was 3, I was 4, so she was 3.
Yeah.
Same thing. We
It's
don't
just
have anything to
matter of
compare it
fact.
to.
Yeah.
Exactly. We have no fear of anything like that because we have no place to put it.
Right.
We have no place to put that information. Nobody's told us to be afraid of stuff like that, at that age. I never had literature around the house. I never watched anything that would influence her when she was a child on purpose because I didn't want her to be predisposed to anything as she was growing up. I wanted her to have her own discovery about things and then this happens. But so subsequently, many years later, I began to embrace my experiences. I, in doing so, was beginning to share a lot of these different events in my life, and one of them being this one. I
But
asked my
Suzanne,
daughter for her
sorry,
permission.
just really quickly before you go there, though, just a couple
Yes.
things about what you just shared, because I'm just like processing this, and
Okay, that's
because
fine.
you called it the confirmation event, which it 100% is. The fact that they were in fact in your daughter's bedroom before they came into yours, and then said,
Yep.
"It's Elise. We can't get her to stop throwing up." It actually pisses me off because I'm a mom and I'm thinking about what I would be feeling and thinking at that point that next morning when she's drawing these things. Do you think that she had already been sick and they were actually, I don't know, coming down to help her, or that they were doing whatever they were doing, smelling her and telling her they love her? What the hell is that? I don't know. Don't like hear that. Did they cause her to get sick, do you think? Not that again, it's
No.
rhetorical, but like,
It's so hard to know because she was fine when she went to bed. I
yeah,
didn't have any memory of her not feeling well when she went to bed. So I don't know if she began to get sick and then they came to help her, or
right.
if they were, I mean, you hear of like healings too. Like did they come to
Mm-hmm.
her and there was something wrong with her and they were fixing her? I
Right.
mean, I don't know.
Because
I
they did
don't
come
know.
in to tell you, hey, it's Elise, which it's
Yes,
crazy
they
that
were
they
worried.
knew her name. Like, that must have, right off the bat, what are you talking about my daughter for? It's Elise. We can't get her to stop throwing up. The other thing I wanted to ask you before you went on, again, I'm sorry for interrupting you, but
No problem.
that woman, or the
Mm,
disc that turned into the woman,
mm, mm,
mentioned
mm,
marriage, right? And she said,
mm-hmm,
well, we'll
mm-hmm,
show you this, if you
mm-hmm,
want. Now, you were engaged to this man, this human man, right? We're
mm-hmm.
assuming he's a human being. What was she was she talking about your upcoming marriage to him, or do you think she was referencing, well, you could be married to someone or something else, like a big picture thing? I don't know. Like, did you ever think
No.
about that? Like, what that phrase was about the marriage thing?
I have thought about that quite a bit. In retrospect, just thinking, what exactly was it that she was offering to me? Was it the insight? Was she, she was generalizing how marriage is the most sacred part of our existence, and I'm giving you the chance to experience this if you wish. And I almost felt like she was generalizing that we humans don't take marriage as seriously as we should. That was my takeaway from her comment. But the whole, "I'm giving you the chance to experience this if you wish," was I supposed to come with her and see something? Was she gonna, hit me with a wand and instill something in me that would have a perfect marriage? I mean, I don't know. I hear of, I'm not quite sure if you're familiar with, Christopher Bledsoe at all, but he has had these visitations from a woman he calls the Shining Lady, and she looked very similar to this woman who came to me. And so I don't know if I might have even seen her before or I might even see her again. But it almost felt like she was so wise in trying to give me some information about, how we're pretty screwed up here on this planet, is basically the gist of it.
Yeah, she's not wrong
So,
there. I'll tell you that.
well, there is that.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I'm so sorry for interrupting. You mentioned your daughter said it was okay to share something, and then I cut you off.
Yeah, no worries. So I started sharing my experiences many years later, and I started talking about this particular incident to a friend, and she actually had said, "Mommy, if you want to talk about it, I'm totally fine with it." You can use my name. She says, but I don't remember it. I don't believe in it. And I don't want to talk about it. And that's been that. And I said, okay, well, listen, I totally respect your, privacy. I said, but if you ever feel the need to share anything with me or talk to me about anything, please know that I am here. And she is going to be 37 this year, so I have not heard a word out of it or out of her about it. So,
Well, hopefully that means that she's not getting continuing visits,
right,
because
correct.
no matter what, they're coming into people's homes, and that's not the nicest thing to do. At the end of
It's
the
just
day,
not right.
yeah,
Right.
it's just
I mean, I can appreciate if it's kind of like a weird, I mean, we've created, humanity has created that we live in dwellings and we have this existence. I mean, this is just the way we live. It's almost like they don't understand why we have a problem with it because it's so unnatural for them to live that way. Do you know what I mean? And I also got the impression that they can't, this is from one of my experiences. I totally forgot about this. It's pretty funny. They can't understand why we put so much power in a piece of paper, and I'm talking about paper currency.
mm-hmm.
And they thought that was hysterical. That, I mean, like, it's the end all be all. Money is the end all be all, and they're totally oblivious to why that could be.
They must just laugh and cry at us endlessly. I mean, we kill each other. We kill each
Exactly.
other over the paper. So
Exactly. So that experience definitely was my confirmation event, that made me it almost and on the one hand, it was so maddening and just devastating, and on the other hand, I felt like I was finally free of the burden of not knowing, and, probably would have caused me a lot of severe mental problems if I hadn't been able to come to grips with it in this manner.
well, and you weren't alone. Unfortunately, it included your daughter, but you weren't alone anymore.
Right, for sure. So that was in 1989. And then so we've had a few different situations. This is really interesting. At the house there, it was pretty active, and like I said, we did live near a military base. I also continued to have some precognitive dreams living there. And one of them was I was I dreamed that I was in England, and it was during the 1600s, which is ironic again. I was wearing a huge dress. I had like the big Marie Antoinette hairdo, and a gentleman is standing in front of me, and he comes over to ask me to dance. And when I look at him, it's one of my clients from my hair salon. He like bows down and he says, "May I have this dance?" And so I said, "Sure." And so we're dancing a waltz or whatever in the ballroom, and all of a sudden my grandmother walks in, but it's like present day, like it's really her. And she's like this little old Danish lady, and she's got this really stern, look on her face, and she stomps across the room and she said, "You can't dance with her. You're married." Like that. And he says, "Oh, forgive me," and he bows to me and he leaves. And I look at my grandma like, "What's your problem?" And then I woke up. The next morning, I thought, wow, that was such a strange dream. And so I'm getting ready for work. And as I'm driving to work, I'm like just driving along the highway, and I'm about to get off the freeway to go to my job. And I look in my rearview mirror. And when I look in my rearview mirror, it's the client from my dream in my rearview mirror. And I'm like, what? So I put my blinker on and, make a right hand turn off the freeway. And he does the same thing. I make a right, he makes a right. I get into the left turn lane, he gets in the left turn lane. I make a left, he makes a left. I'm like, "Oh my god, what is happening?" So I keep driving, keep driving. I pull into the parking lot of my work, and so does he. I'm like, "Oh my god." So I I get in my car and I run into the salon and I look at my books, my appointment book. My first client had canceled and he had called in and taken her appointment. I didn't know that before I left work because it had happened after I left work.
These are so cool to me. What are again, what would be the chances of this?
So weird. And he sat in my chair and I'm like, my eyes are like saucers.
Yeah.
I'm like, you're not going to believe this. So I told him the dream and he turned around and he looked at me. You got to be shitting me. Like, I'm not kidding. So weird. So weird.
What? I wonder, you're back in the 1600s in England and you have this big old beautiful hairdo and a big old beautiful dress, and I wonder what the reason for the setting being then, that you guys are back then and meeting.
What if we knew each other in a past life? I don't know.
Once you told him this, did he ever say, oh yeah, I've had kind of a weird, maybe he didn't call it precog dream or whatever, but he said, oh yeah, I had something weird happen like that before. Did he ever mention that?
Never.
Huh.
Nope. No, and I did. It's like I've knew him for years. I did his wife's hair. I did his daughter's hair. It's just the weirdest thing.
And why would your grandma
anyway.
say, oh, you can't, to him, you can't dance with her, you're married.
Right.
She was admonishing him.
Right, for sure.
I wonder what that part was about.
I have no idea. In fact, when I had that dream, I was not married. When I was working in that salon, I was not married. So this is a really interesting one as well that you might appreciate because it has nothing to do with UFOs. So one of my hairdresser friends, she and I were thinking about opening a salon together. And so she and her husband and my husband and myself, we would go and have, dinner and like kind of figure out how we could make this, come to fruition. My ex-husband was in commercial real estate, so he knew a lot about the market and stuff like that and what it would take to start a business. So that was really cool for me. So, or for us, I should say. She was really sweet. She had just had a baby, and she decided that she was going to have some elective surgery after her pregnancy. And I was like, "Oh my gosh, you're just too beautiful. I mean, what are you thinking? That's just crazy. Why would you do that?" And she's like, "Oh, I just want to do it just for me. It's just something I really have always wanted to do." And I said, "Okay, well, I'm just telling you, you're beautiful the way you are." So anyway, she was really just kind of nervous about the surgery. And I remember she called me on Valentine's Day. It was the night before her surgery. And she's like, "Oh, what are you doing? I just wanted to say hi." And I said, "Oh, we're having Valentine's dinner at home." And she's like, "Oh, well, have a glass of wine for me. I haven't been drinking." And I said, "Oh, I will." And so she had her surgery. And then I was driving to work the next day. And as I'm driving, her mom called me and she's like, hi, Suzanne. So what are you doing right now? I said, "I'm driving to work." She's like, "Can you do me a favor?" And I said, "Sure." And she goes, "Can you pull over?" And so I pulled over and she says, "Tanya's in a coma." I'm like, "What?" Sorry.
No,
And
it's okay.
she apparently it was an outpatient surgery when she was in the recovery area. They had given her some Demerol for the pain, but when they came back to check it on her, she was still in a lot of pain, and so she asked for more medication, and so the nurse had to clear it with the doctor, and the doctor did, and she said, "Let's do this. Why don't we get you dressed? Your husband's in the lobby. We'll get you dressed, and then we'll give you some more medication, and then you can go home." And so they took off her oxygen monitor off of her finger when they put her shirt on and all that for her, and then or for her to put her shirt on. When they came back in, she had stopped breathing and had been there for a few minutes, which is just beyond me that they would even leave her unattended. I just, to this day. So she was in a coma like for 2 weeks, 14 days. I had a little shrine on my fireplace mantle that I would, pray every day for her and visit her during the day just to try and, give her positive energy around her, while she was laying there. And I was getting ready for work upstairs, blow drying my hair. And as I'm looking in the mirror, all of a sudden behind me, I saw her peek around the corner and smile and wave and then peek her head back away. And I turned around and she was gone. And I called her mom and she had just passed away.
Oh,
So
jeez.
I saw her. She came to say goodbye. It was really her. It wasn't an apparition. I couldn't see through her. She was a solid being. I'm telling you. She had that same look on her face and she had the most beautiful smile and she just waved and then she was gone. But I had never seen anybody that had passed at that point in my life. And it was quite remarkable, I have to say. It was very, very, very sad, but it was, a very unfortunate situation.
Terrible situation. Easily avoided.
Very.
So her though coming to you at the very time that she had died, poignant, obviously, but also her smiling and waving, I think is at least some kind of a silver lining, right? It's kind of her saying it's
Absolutely.
all good, Suzanne. Like, I'm okay now.
I totally agree with you. I mean, in fact, I don't even know. I don't think anybody else, if they did see her, nobody said anything to me.
Right.
And maybe it's just one of those things you don't talk about because, again, we don't want to be thought of as being insane.
Right. Yeah, it's not
So,
easy to fly the freak flag in front of most people. So you just don't know
right.
how they're going to react. And so, wow.
This is
Well,
true.
thank you for sharing that one. That was kind of a tearjerker right there. That made me really sad to hear that because it's just so needlessly and easily avoided situations. It just really pisses me off.
Right. I almost wonder if I kept saying those things to her that maybe she would change her mind because I knew maybe something bad was going to happen.
Right.
No, I don't
But
know. Since I had all this other stuff.
you can't beat yourself up about it though, right? Because you
Yeah,
just can't.
I know.
You could
I
drive
guess.
yourself nuts doing that. Because at the end of the day, she really wanted it and she was excited about it. So, maybe there's something to that. If there's something that you're just your heart set on and something, no matter what it is, goes bad, then you kind of get that easy pass in, and that's why she was smiling and waving at you there at that moment.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, I just think that I wonder if because when you're so open to all this other stuff, you're just open to everything.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if you've had that experience with some of your other guests, but it seems to be the case in a few of them.
Yeah, absolutely, it does. But as
So
I'll say it again though, you guys definitely have something special about you.
special.
There's something there.
I'm kidding. That's something weird. So,
Hey, I like the weird. It's no, I like I said, the word gift is the generalization of it because some people will say it's not a damn gift. It's a bad thing because they're having bad experiences, and I get that. But there's just something different about some of you guys. And I do think that it has to do with you can use different parts of your brain or you perceive things different. You're more of a transmitter or a receiver than other people. Whatever that may be, you guys have got it.
right. True. So, right around the same time, it was in 1994, my mother lived really close to us, like about 10 minutes away when we lived in Camarillo. And we were coming back from Thanksgiving dinner one night. And for anybody who's listening, they might realize or recognize what I'm about to say. Between Newbury Park and Camarillo, there's a grade that goes down. It's like the highway goes down a few hundred feet. We're driving on this Camarillo grade, and as we're driving along, there's this green flash of light that goes from left to right over the freeway and over our car. And it's so fast that it almost looked like a laser beam, but it didn't seem connected like a beam of light. It looked more like an object that was just traveling extremely fast. That made it look like it was a beam of light. And we all went, "Whoa, did you see that?" And I'm like, "Yeah, that's so crazy. Wow, I've never seen anything like that." But it was coming from the direction of Port Hueneme Naval Base. So I thought, well, maybe it's just like a military thing. But I'm thinking we don't have any like planes or anything that travels that quickly, and certainly nothing that, is a green flash of light. And then I thought, well, maybe they're flashing a beam of light from there. But I'm like, no, because it was just something solid. Anyway, so I went home, didn't talk about it again. And a couple of days later, I was reading the local paper. There was a section called, actually, no, I think it was the Los Angeles Times had a Ventura County section in it. And in that section, there was an article about these two girls that were driving on the highway the same night we were, who were driving from Camarillo to Ventura, which was about 15 minutes north of Camarillo. And while they were driving on that highway, all of a sudden they were in Ventura 2 hours later. And they had no idea what happened. So this article was written by the director of MUFON, the Ventura County chapter. And so these girls had missing time from that event of right around the same time that we saw that green flash of light, because it happened at the same time that we were driving. So I saw at the end of the article that the name of the woman was Alice Levy, and she was the director for Ventura County. And so I contacted her and I said, "Hey, listen, I just read this article and we saw this weird thing, and I don't know if it has anything to do with it, but I thought I would share it with you." And then she says to me, "Oh, okay, well, that's really great. We really appreciate it." And then she said, "Have you ever seen anything before in your life? Anything strange?" It's like, uh, now, granted, I had not said anything to anyone besides my husband at this point. Okay. So when she asked me that question, I didn't know what to say. Something inside me told me that it was time. And I said, "Actually, yes, I have seen something before in my lifetime." She says, "Oh, really? So what have you seen? Can you describe it to me?" And I said, "Well, how much time do you have?" And she says, "Oh, well, really? Can I come over and talk to you?" And I'm like, okay." And she says, "Well, can I ask you a question? Do you have any weird marks on your body or anything strange on your body?" And I said, "Actually, I do have something weird on my body, and I've never said anything to anybody about it, but it's always bothered me. In my hairline, above my left eyebrow, I've always had this little thing that I could move around underneath my skin, and it almost feels like it would be like a bone chip or something, but I don't know. And so sometimes it hurts and sometimes it doesn't." And she says, "Okay, well, is it okay if I bring somebody with me to have a look at it?" And I said, "Sure, no problem." So I was out. I was out of the closet. So she came to my house a couple days later and she brought Dr. Roger Lear with her. And I don't know if you're familiar with him at all.
I am, but yeah,
But
let everybody know who he is.
yes. So Dr. Roger Lear actually was a podiatrist in Thousand Oaks, California. But on the side, he did implant removal for people who thought they had implants. I didn't know who he was at all. I never heard of him at that point because I didn't really talk to anybody about this kind of stuff. So they came in and she brought a tape recorder and he brought his little clipboard and he checked out my little implant and he made a couple of notes and he said, "Do you want me to take it out?" And I said, "Nope, I'm fine. I'll just leave it."
Now the second that he asked you that, you had the no out. Like you didn't have to think about it.
Nope.
Do you have any idea why you would immediately say no? Is there just some gut feeling that you're just not supposed
Yep,
to take that out?
that is correct.
Mm. Now
I just
Whitley had something, right?
Yes.
That would actually, he'd hold like radios up to it and stuff, and it would,
Mhm.
yeah.
Mhm.
Does
Yeah,
yours?
his in his ear,
Mm-hmm.
it actually moves, and when somebody would actually try and look at it, it would actually physically move while they were inspecting it inside of his ear.
God, yeah.
Yeah,
No,
so
thanks. That would freak me the hell right out. Now, did yours have any attributes like that, reacting to radio waves or moving?
I've never done that. I've never done the radio thing, but
Yeah.
it has moved. Sometimes I could feel it there, and sometimes I wouldn't feel it there. Like right now, I'm touching it and I can feel it.
Mm.
So I don't know. I don't know. It's kind of like, you know what it is, kind of? It's kind of like I don't want to know if it has
Yeah.
radio frequency on it.
All right.
You know what I mean? Just for the same reason that I have not had regression,
Mm-hmm.
because I don't really need to know anything bad that happened to me if it did. I'm perfectly fine with all the things that I do remember, which obviously seems to be quite a bit.
It is. And life's hard enough without
Right.
learning bad things. Yeah, I don't blame you, to be honest with you. I mean, because if you held some kind of an old radio up to it or whatever the hell, the EMF detector, whatever a bone chip or a natural growth is not going to affect those things. So you would know immediately that it wasn't one of those natural things.
Right.
So I don't blame you.
Right. Right. For sure.
Because you
And then I would
just,
be like, probably would not sleep. I
right,
probably would just I have anxiety anyway, so I just
right,
don't need that.
right. I don't blame you a bit. I really don't. It's like a puzzle, and yeah, you kind of want to know some things, but other things are like, yeah, we're good. I'm all right. I mean,
For sure.
it's cool that you got to meet Roger Lear, though.
I did. I actually met him quite a few times. I was really grateful for that. We became friends.
Now, did he kind of not push you, but did he really try to steer you in the direction of, hey, I really kind of want to see what's in at your hairline there?
Oh, you never did, actually. I think he really, after, doing what he did for so many years, I think that it has to be, up to the individual.
Mm-hmm.
And there's so much stress involved with a lot of these cases anyway. I think he
Yeah.
was really sensitive to people, in that respect and, respected their decisions. So yeah, he never asked me again.
Yeah, I mean, I think he's written several books, and a lot of them have the more malevolent cases that we were talking about, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Mm.
Some years went by. I don't think anything really substantial happened. I mean, I might have had, it's weird. It's like sometimes I think I have visitations and it's like, oh, it wasn't really that big of a deal this time. So I don't really make a note of it.
Like you don't
It's
even
kind of
count
silly.
it.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
what are the little things that make you think, oh, maybe something happened, but it's not substantial enough to note? What kinds of things go on?
Just like I'll wake up and maybe I just remember like a flash of being somewhere else, but not really remembering where it was. You know what I'm saying? Or anything that really happened. So I didn't bring anything back with me, that kind of stuff, but I know that something happened, except for one time when my ironically, my husband and I ended up getting a divorce after all that with the marriage stuff. So it just wasn't meant to be. And I moved to West Hollywood. When I was living there, I had asthma when I was a kid. And then again, it ramped up pretty bad when I was a hairdresser from all the chemicals. And so, like, if I had a lot of, like, chemical processes, the next morning I would wake up and I would just be just dying. And so I had an inhaler and it really gave me like heart palpitations. So just, I hated taking it, but it just was really a part of my life that I wished would go away. One night I was laying in bed and I remembered having this just really crazy dream, but I couldn't really put my finger on what exactly was going on. All I knew was something was happening on my back and it hurt really, really, really bad. It hurt so bad that it actually woke me up. And when I woke up, I was laying on my stomach, which I never do. And it's like as I was waking up, the pain was starting to dissipate, just kind of like going away, going away. Like I felt like if I had gone back into the dream, I'd feel the pain again. But as I woke up, it went away again. I never had asthma again.
You never had a
So
flare
I've
up again? What?
never, never.
Even after still working at the salon and having these different processes, or were you not even at the salon at that point?
I was still a hairdresser. I never had
Wow.
another asthma attack.
What the hell?
Yeah.
And a back
So I don't know.
procedure.
I don't know. I mean, I've
Huh.
heard of things and I just thought it was strange. I just my doctor was like, "Oh wow, well, that's really great." And maybe he's like, "Well, maybe you were just allergic to something in your house that you're just not allergic to anymore or whatever."
Mm.
I'm like, "No, because I've had it since I was a child. How
Yeah, I
can
don't
that
know
be?"
about that. I mean, whatever it was, that's great. The pain. What would you rate the pain scale?
Oh, like a 90?
Oh,
I'm kidding. It felt like I was having you know what it felt like? It felt like if you were having surgery without any anesthesia.
well, that could be a 90. I
Yeah,
mean,
that's what it felt like. I mean, if I would equate the pain, I've never actually had surgery before, but I've had 2 children without pain medication, so maybe that.
that'd be about a 90. Yeah.
Yeah, about a 90.
Yeah, 85, 90. I don't know. Any probably a very obvious question, a stupid question, but any marks on your back or redness or rashes or anything like that the next day?
Not that I remember.
Huh.
I didn't you know what? I didn't even think to look
Right.
because I didn't really think anything about it at the time. I just thought maybe I had a flare up in my sleep or something of asthma, or maybe I was sleeping wrong with my arm up over my head, or, I was trying to just explain it away.
But you weren't,
So I
you
really,
were just having pain. You weren't having trouble breathing at that time the pain was going on.
no, no, no,
Hmm.
no, but I was sleeping.
Wow. Well, that's weird.
Yeah, it's weird. So
Either way, though, no asthma anymore. So that's amazing.
I'm pretty happy about that.
Yeah, no matter what the hell, that's great.
Yeah. Yeah. So then I was living in West Hollywood and I was dating a guy there prior and it was like, what year was that? They all blend together at this point. Like 2006, something like that. I remember I worked really far away from where I was living now, so that was a nightmare. One Saturday, I was driving home from work, and I was on the 101 freeway right where it merges onto the 405, so right at that little intersection there, but I lived on Laurel Canyon, so I would go straight. But as I was driving there, in the distance, I saw this I don't know what it was a UFO for sure. It looked like a Tic Tac, but it was metallic. It moved really slowly, and it was just going in between and then it went in between these 2 mountains, and it looked like it was over Glendale. And I remember coming home, and I was telling my boyfriend, I said, "Oh my gosh, I just saw the craziest UFO," because all the UFOs I had seen in my life at that point were during nighttime. This was the first time I'd actually seen had a daylight sighting. So, the following week he had come to work with me because he was going golfing with a friend and whatever, and then he was gonna come home with me. So as we're driving home on the highway, I was telling him, I said, I said, "Do you remember that UFO I told you about?" I said, "It was right there." And right when I said that, it was there again at the exact spot where I was pointing my finger.
Wow.
And he saw it. I know. I'm like, I can't believe this. This is crazy. It's exactly the same spot. And it wasn't even like it was the same exact time of day. I mean, it was around, like it was during the afternoon, but it wasn't like
Right.
3:15 or whatever. So, and he saw it, and I'm like, I can't believe this, and you're seeing this. It's crazy. And then we saw another UFO, daytime UFO at his mother's house, who lived in North Hollywood. We were having a barbecue in his backyard, I'm sorry, in her backyard, and there were about 7 of us. And as we're sitting there, I look up and I saw this like black hockey puck flying above. It was like, I don't know how many feet away, probably like 500 feet. It looked pretty small. And I'm pointing to it and I'm like, look, look, and everybody's looking, but only some of us could see it, and then some of us couldn't. It was the weirdest thing.
Uh-huh.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. And therein lies the whole thing that I was just mentioning about the special people, right? Because why in the heck would only some of you guys see that thing?
Right. It
That
was right there.
that is, I think, a huge piece to all of everything that we talk about, all of it, not just UFOs. That is incredible to me.
Right. Yep. Yeah, it was pretty incredible. And then it's funny because I thought, wow, that was such a vivid sighting, and it was so different than anything I'd ever seen before. So I went on, I think it was either MUFON or the UFO Stalker, one of the two, to see if anybody had reported it. And somebody had. In fact, somebody had taken a video of it and posted it on YouTube. It was exactly in the same, it was weird, really weird, because that day was kind of cloudy, and the clouds, it was like later in the day, and the clouds were really colorful, kind of like they are in the desert, and they're like kind of purpley and orange. And I remarked that the video had the same cloud formation, so I knew that this craft was the exact one that we had seen. But the interesting thing was the guy had taken this video with a really pretty nice camera, because he got a really good close up of it, and it had rotating lights around it that you couldn't see from our vantage point because it was so far away. I should try and find that video for you.
That
It's
would be
pretty,
amazing. I was just gonna
it's pretty
ask
amazing.
if,
Yeah.
yeah, if you knew how to track that down, that would be pretty incredible. Well, the whole cloud thing. Not only does that tie into what your daughter said that next day, right? They come from the clouds, but
Yeah.
my buddy Jesus Payan, he's actually was on Breaking Bad and all of that. He's an actor, but he's like way into UFOs and cryptids. I've had him on before. He says the same thing. He says that they're, you got to watch the clouds. They're in the clouds. They hide in the clouds. They move around through the clouds. I mean, that's not always the case, obviously, but he was big about that too. So I just kind of find that interesting. When you say they come from the clouds, it could just mean from above. That might be what your daughter meant.
I mean, she was 3 years
But
old.
yeah,
So
exactly. Just they come from above. But I just find that
Right.
interesting because I've heard that time and time again. It has to do with the clouds. They're in the clouds or whatever that means. They probably just use it for cover. But that black hockey puck story is pretty neat. That
Yeah, it was,
that only
it was
some
pretty
of
cool.
you guys saw that. And you're
Yeah.
going, no,
Did you see
you're
it?
probably going, what the hell? It's right there. How do you not see that? And some of the people are going,
It's true.
there's nothing there. That's crazy.
It's crazy. It's like literally like 3 out of the 7 of us could see it.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. See. Okay. So 3 out of 7 could see it. So the gift is, there's less of those with the gift than not. So, and I wonder,
Right.
the 3 of you that saw it, if you were able to sit down and, we could all have a powwow, I would love to know if they had other experiences
Yeah.
in their life, right?
Well, I know them really well, and they knew all about me at that point. I was pretty out. So, they knew my experiences, and nobody had ever said anything to me. I had a group of friends that had the one eyebrow raised all the time, and the other ones that would sit there like with a beer and just stare at you while you told your
Right.
story.
Right.
You know what I mean?
They're thinking,
So,
this will be the last time you ever see me. No, I'm just kidding. I've gotten those looks, trust me.
I'm sure you have.
They'll be like,
I can
oh,
relate.
God, I thought I knew you.
Right, right. Oh, you don't know me. Makes you
Woo.
wonder, doesn't it, when you meet people?
Yeah, it does.
So then I had this. So this was like 2011. So I'm jumping further now from 2006. So like 2011, I started writing a blog because I just felt like, a lot of people are really coming out of the closet now. And I feel like it's safe for me to share these stories. And I felt like I really had a sense of mission to get this information out there. And I love to write. So I thought, well, what better way to utilize that? And so I created a blog and I started sharing my stories. And one time I was just really into like getting information and reading a lot more also about other people's experiences and listen. This was before we had the podcast. They were just starting. One night I went to bed, and this is when I lived in West Hollywood, and I had this really bizarre dream where I woke up in the dream, okay? And I'm standing next to 5 other people, and we're all holding hands, and we're all looking at each other like, "What is going on?" And we're looking at each other like, "Okay, and why are we holding hands, number 1, and what are we doing here?" And when we looked ahead of us, there was, like, a huge like a tour bus, like a bus, like a coach, like a big motor coach, like if you were going on a cross-country trip, was in front of us, and it had, like, tipped over on its side. There was no other car involved. It just looked like it had just, like, fallen in a ditch and just, like, tipped over. We all looked at each other, and then we dropped our hands, and we all had this, like, feeling that we needed to go into the bus, and we ran to the bus, all of us, and went into the bus. And when I said we went into the bus, we went in I went through the windshield, okay? So I went through the windshield into the bus, and when I went inside, there were a bunch of women and children screaming and crying. Some of them were, like, hanging from their seatbelts and stuff. So all of a sudden, I was drawn to this one woman, and she was looking at me, and she was speaking to me telepathically in a different language that I understood, and she said, "Help my baby." And so I'm looking around, and I see that her baby is underneath the seat. So I pull the baby out, and she has a little gash on her cheek. And then I undo the mom's seatbelt. And then I look around, and I see that the other 5 people that were with me were all tending to other people as well. So I felt good about that. Everybody was, like, attending to somebody. And so I made a quick scan of the rest of the people. And once I assessed that everybody else was okay, I left the bus, like, right through the windshield again, went back into my body, and I woke up. And when I woke up, I bolted upright, was sitting up on bed. I'm like, "What just happened?" And my boyfriend was sleeping, and I just said, "Okay, that was crazy." I couldn't go back to sleep. I got up, I got on the computer, and I just was, tinkering around. And so when he woke up, I told him about the dream. I said, "This is so crazy. This dream was so realistic. I really felt like I was there, and we were witnessing this crash." And he's like, "Oh, it was just a dream." And I'm like, whatever. It just wasn't a dream, okay?" And so he just kinda rolled his eyes. And so I went about my day and did all my errands, but I could not shake the dream. So I came back, he went to work, and I came back home, and I opened up my computer, and I just thought, "You know what? I'm just gonna Google bus crash, Europe, July 7th, 2011." And so I did that. And then I put Europe because I felt like since that lady had an accent, or I'm sorry, she was speaking in a different language, telepathically, mind you, that, it was had to been like, in Europe somewhere. So I Googled that, I typed it in, and then I scrolled through, like, 3 pages, and on the 3rd page, there was this tiny little thumbnail of a motor coach on its side, just like the one from my dream. And I clicked on it. And when I did, it reads Bulgaria, a bus full of women and children on the way to a summer camp capsizes. One person dead. And I'm like, one person was dead? No, there wasn't anybody dead in there. I checked, and then it said the person was ejected, and I must have not seen that person. And it happened while I was sleeping.
Holy smokes.
So, because it was in Europe and I was sleeping, it was already the next day.
Did you show your boyfriend this?
I did. He couldn't believe it. He thought I was a witch. Let's just put it that way.
Oh, so that wouldn't help that thought then.
No.
Wow.
So I, to this day, don't know if I remote viewed this situation. I don't know, why. I mean, I obviously was there. I obviously saw what was happening. And I tried to make sense of it. And I kept thinking, well, if I was dreaming and I ended up there, then maybe, like, you hear about when people have car accidents and they see somebody was helping them when they were in the car, like a
Mm-hmm.
guardian angel. I started thinking, what if we are the guardian angels when we sleep?
That's a cool thought.
I mean, what other reason would it be that I was there?
Or maybe those of you that can do things like astral project and remote view, whether you do it on purpose or not, are in fact these quote unquote angels. I like that thought.
I like to think that that's the case.
Have you tried to
But
remote view on purpose?
no, I never have. And maybe I should.
That'd be pretty cool. I mean, you should be making
I know
a shit ton of money with the military with a gift like that.
Yeah. You know what? I just have to make a couple
Seriously.
phone calls.
Like, do you know who my dad is? Do you know who my grandfather is? Come on now, let me in. Let me in right now. No, I really, and this is without consciously trying to develop this skill. So imagine if you really tried to practice.
Oh my God. Maybe I've heard a lot about, I know a few people that do it and do practice it, and they go to like the Monroe Institute and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I should look into that.
That'd be pretty badass, to be honest with you.
I think I should try
I
it
mean,
out.
you're
I'll
doing
let
this
you know.
stuff without even trying.
I know. I mean, I have to say that and you've probably heard this too from other experiencers, that they have a heightened sense of psychic awareness
Mm-hmm.
and like synchronicities and high strangeness and stuff like that. My life is just riddled with all that anyway, on top of all this precog stuff.
Right.
So I don't know. I'm just a freak of nature.
It's the best kind of freak of nature. There's freaks of nature that kill people and hurt kids, and you're
True.
fine. You're totally fine. No, but that would honestly, that's something to maybe think about.
Right. So then like about, yeah, so this was really soon after this Bulgarian bus crash situation happened. My boyfriend and I were just not doing well at all, and it's a long story. I won't get into it, personal issues, but I was very unhappy, and we were at his, oh, wait, backtrack. The last time I saw the Grays happened right around this time. We were at the same house in North Hollywood at his mom's house. I was actually dog sitting for her while she went back to New Jersey. And so one night, she had a golden retriever. One night I was laying in bed, and all of a sudden I wake up. It was 3:33, mind you, and that has never happened to me where I actually wake up at 3:33 and look at the clock. But it absolutely was 3:33. I sat up in bed and I looked at the hallway. The door was open, and I know this is going to sound strange, but in walk three Grays. Okay, just face to face. And they were just standing there, and the dog wasn't even reacting. The dog was just laying there. They just stood there staring at me, and I'm like, "Excuse me? Can I help you?" And they said to me telepathically, "We are the Greys, and we are here." And I said, "Okay, well, would you like a cup of coffee or something?" I almost thought it was comical because nothing was happening, and I thought it was a joke, like they were punking me or something. And I'm thinking, "Why is nothing happening?" And they just turned around and they walked away. And that was it. I felt like something was protecting me, or I felt like my interaction with them was either ending or it was changing. And I think what they were saying was, we're Grays, we are here, we're always going to be here. So just know that we're always going to be here. And they said it in so many words, and then they left. And that was the last time I saw them, and that was in like 2011.
I wonder why that would be the last time. What was the catalyst for
know.
that?
I mean, that's the last time I've seen them since.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? So I just remarked that after seeing them, things started changing with my experience. And it started becoming more like a conscious contact and increased synchronicities and downloads, psychic messages. I started doing a lot of meditating, and I got messages that way that have impacted my life in an amazing way. And that pretty much sets up like the next chapter of where my life was headed at that point. And that started with me pleading, crying outside in the backyard and surrendering to the universe on my knees because I was so unhappy in my relationship that I needed guidance. That I said, please, the next time you introduce somebody to my life, I had a checklist, and that was that he was a parent, that he was an experiencer, that he was humble, that he was loving and kind, all these things. And I always had my go-to constellation when I would have these, conversations with the universe, and that was Orion. And the minute I finished my plea, a shooting star went over Orion's belt. I recognized that, and I said, thank you. And when I said thank you, there was another one. After that, my life changed. I mean, like within 6 months. It was the most incredible experience. I can't even begin to tell you, but I will.
You got to try at least, right? Suzanne will be back to finish the rest of her experiences because there is quite a bit left. And thank you. Thank you so much for being willing to share all these experiences, Suzanne.
It's been my absolute pleasure and an honor to be on your show. So thank you so much, Shannon.
Yeah, we'll talk again soon. Part 2 coming up, guys.